And here we are live with our Google Hangout with our good friend Mr. Kellan Fluckiger of Arizona. Kellan was originally from Arizona and returned back there after a little stint in Alberta that we're about to talk to. Say hello to everyone, Kellan.
Hey, Dave. How you doing? It's good to talk to you. I'm actually in Edmonton today, taking a month break from the heat. But hey, back to Arizona in a couple weeks.
Fantastic. Actually, that's what's sort of ironic about that, is that you're from thousands of miles away, but right here we're still separated by distance so that we can go about our lives after we finish this. The things we wanted to talk about today are the future of the Alberta electric system. And I guess you would first want to ask yourself, what do you two guys know about the Alberta electric system? And I'm going to let Kellan go first because his resume is a lot more impressive. So Kellan, could you just please let our listeners know, what your background is, where your expertise comes from?
Well, I spent 30 years in electricity from 1977 to 2007. A lot of the last 15 was in the deregulated environment. So I participated in the original FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission effort to open transmission. I participated in building and working with the mess that happened in California during the 1999, 2000, 2001 timeframe, 2002, the blackouts and problems that also affected Alberta with price spikes and so forth all over the West. I then came to Alberta in 2003, was here till the end of 2007 as effectively the ADM, or the Electricity, or Executive Director of Electricity Division in Alberta Energy, and the purpose for coming here was to make some corrections to the flaws and problems in the Alberta electricity market that made it susceptible to the problems that happened in 2000, 2001. So I've been doing this for a long time. In that role, I ended up testifying before Congress and both houses of the California legislature and being on television a lot more than I wanted to be, having to explain electricity problems in California and other places. So a long history doing this, very active in the market design, ended up speaking at Harvard and at Stanford and at conferences literally all over the world on this topic during that the last 15 years, my consultant period, I guess you would call it.
I've characterized you as the architect of our Alberta market, and I think that's fair in a lot of cases. Some things have changed since you left in 2007. But is that a fair description, would you say?
Well, Alberta started deregulating in 1996 at the same time California did, and made a first stab at it, and created some instruments and some entities that some succeeded, some failed, some significant changes had to be made. They made some changes to the law in 2001, I think. We did some significant overhauling during the time that I was here, and that was the reason that I was brought. I wrote the legislation that created the Alberta Utilities Commission, split that off from the Utilities Board, tried to create a more effective market, and as we'll talk about later today, there remain some significant flaws, but they are not in design. They were from failure to implement the design pieces that were supposed to be part of the design package.
That's a great teaser. We're going to have some very interesting things to talk to you about. I'll let you know a little bit more about me. As soon as I do one shameless plug, I am going to be Master of Ceremonies at the Alberta Power Summit coming up in Calgary, September 24th, 25th, put on by Jeff Mix and his good folks. I encourage you all to attend if you're interested in the topics that we're talking about today. So for those of you who aren't aware of my background, I was previously the Executive Director for Regulatory Affairs and then the Executive Director for the entire Office of the Utilities Consumer Advocate. This had come after many years as a regulatory analyst for the Utilities Commission on a lot of the big deregulation hearings. And if you look at my blog, you'll see what drove me to want to become a consumer advocate rather than working either for the Commission or for a company. My heart is with the customer. Nevertheless, through that time, I was in every hearing for every utility in the province. So my background is pretty extensive as far as you can get in terms of Alberta. Was also involved from the customer side in all of the policy debates regarding energy markets and policies. So I was there while a lot of this stuff was going on in the room, with the ministers looking to see what could be done. And I share some of Kellan's concerns that issues that were pointed out at that time haven't been addressed yet today. And it's very problematic for what we're going to face as consumers in Alberta. So, Kellan, we've had some great discussions over the last several months about electricity in Alberta. Some of it reminiscing about hard times, some of it, looking at what could actually be done and what's arising now. And so, with that, let me just ask you: what are the big concerns that you have, from a few years away, looking at where the Alberta market is now?
Well, the market, electricity is an interesting commodity. We created electricity markets with the idea that the competitive forces that are so powerful and profound in Alberta, that make Alberta a haven for entrepreneurs and a great business place, that those competitive forces would bring the commodity of electricity to consumers in a better way, at a better price, give them choices, and the things that restructuring or deregulating, as it's commonly called, have done in other things like cell phones and telephone service and all those kinds of things before. Electricity has some particular problems. You can't store it well. It doesn't transmit over very long distances well. And we have this weird social agreement, which is there never will be a shortage. We will never run out. So when you go to the store and buy a new big computer, you don't ever ask the salesman if there's going to be enough power to run your machine when you get home. The assumption is, if you want to pay for it, there will always be power and we never run out. So that makes electricity unique and more difficult. When I finished in 2007, at the end of 2007, there were a number of outstanding issues that had been identified and specific solutions proposed, and some of them are, were written to regulation, but are not complete still as of this day. And so the failure of completing those things, or the political pressure that was brought to bear, and so the politicians being unwilling to implement some corrections because of pressure, have caused electricity market in Alberta to remain flawed. Now, across North America, there have been a number of jurisdictions that have deregulated, some very poorly, some moderately limping along, and that's the class that's Alberta's in still, and then some that are turning into be kind of successful or fairly successful, like Texas. So let me just give you really quickly the three biggest areas that if Alberta would implement, the economic signals and the complaints that generators have or investors have would evaporate. Number one, the proposal or suggestion was that no single participant should control more than 20% capacity. That is violated. The rule in Alberta is 30%. That is not competitive. No jurisdiction thinks it's competitive except Alberta, and that kind of control gives one player the power to control prices, which we see demonstrated regularly in the Alberta market. 20% is the rule used in most other, nearly all other jurisdictions, and provides effective balance in the market. The second piece is there was a strong recommendation that your intertie capacity, and that is your ability to exchange power with the US and Saskatchewan and BC and so forth, also be at least 20%, or about the size of the largest competitor. That is not done. You have internally built a lot of transmission, or coming online, some say overbuilt, but I'm going to leave that policy debate for another time. But the external ability of others to compete with your generators internally is not there. That, interestingly enough, is being opposed by most generators, of course, because it erodes their ability to control prices. So that's number two, capacity between jurisdictions. Number three is the ability for load, the consumer, to participate. You as an individual consumer have the right to turn your stuff off. That simply lowers your bill. If consumers could aggregate, meaning work collectively, up to 20%, the same number, and turn off and on, like generators turn up and down, they would be an effective participant in the market. The funny thing, the suppliers argue that's collusion, but ownership or control of 20% and even more by a generator somehow is okay. Participation by load at that quantity is somehow collusion. Obviously, ridiculous on its face, but argued because, and again, it erodes the price control that those have. So those are the three things: load participation, maximum of 20% control, and intertie capacity at 20% or more. Those three things would move Alberta from the stumbling along category to the working category.
Now, that would be workingly competitive, but you and I have been talking about Texas over the last few days, and a concern that I have out of this energy-only market, which we only really share with Texas, and really only sort of in parts because they also have a very functional day-ahead market. In Texas, they're having the problem that they estimate equilibrium, i.e. the point at which you're adding new capacity fast enough, arises at about an 8% reserve margin for the market. Now, that causes me concern that even in a competitive market, one that's truly competitive, you'll see extraordinary volatility and price spikes arising out of this market.
You're right. And so electricity, again, is unique in that you have to have 7% of load, 7% of the amount being consumed at any moment, in reserve that's available to jump in within 10 minutes. That is a difficult feature when you have an energy-only market, and that means you're only paying actually for the electricity that's being consumed, because there's nothing in the market that adequately compensates for that reserve. On top of that, you have a normal situation. Sorry about the phone, nothing I can do about that. There's a normal situation where generating plants are down for reserve, or excuse me, maintenance. They're offline for maintenance because that has to happen annually for every generator, and they're off for 2 weeks to 6 weeks or 8 weeks for fixing, repair. And so that capacity problem is not adequately addressed in an energy market.
So the solution that they are undertaking in Texas is to raise their price cap by almost an order of magnitude compared with ours. So ours sits at $1,000 a megawatt hour. In Texas, with a special rule they've put in this year, they've effectively gotten it to $9,000 a kilowatt hour. Is even that going to be enough, do you think? Is that going to be, because that's our alternative to capacity markets here in our market design, would be to raise the price cap.
Price cap here in Alberta is 1,000. It should not be raised to 10,000 until those three conditions I said were in place. If those three conditions were in place and fully functional without, transmission must run units and a bunch of technical stuff that those of you watching may or may not know, without those constraints but unconstrained, then you could consider moving the price cap. It would need to be studied and, to some degree experimented with to see if that was enough, or if you had to create what you're alluding to, which is a capacity market, a market just that pays for reserve capacity. That is an alternative. High prices is another way to do that, but high prices will occur by themselves when those other three things are not fixed. So you can't raise the prices till you fix those other problems. When you fix them, then you can think about, or probably very much raise the prices. The existence of a price cap itself indicates a market that's only marginally functional anyway. So I would do that first, and then you can undertake to see if that equilibrium is going to be at a high enough price to do that. In that respect, you're going to also have to educate consumers, because the volatility that is inherent in any capacity shortfall situation is severe. And 1,000 times prices for a commodity, not like gas that goes up a few cents. It would be like gas going from $1 a liter to $20 a liter in a minute. So that's an issue you have to deal with, and people have to be able to provide for their own health and well-being.
I agree that it's very important that people should know what's going on in the market and be able to react to it. Right now, the market is happy, so it's okay. Go about your lives. But if we can get that to focus on there. People haven't seen this. This is our app that gives real-time prices for the Alberta electricity market.
Well,
Sorry,
I haven't seen.
I had to show it off.
No, no, please do. And actually, I wanted to say something about that. Dave's created a really cool app, and even if you couldn't read it there, which I couldn't, that green band around the middle means that it's happy. It goes green, yellow, and red at different price points. What it does is gives you and me the information to know what real-time prices are, and if we're paying those prices, or even the derivative of those, which is the month-ahead proxy that's been created. And I'm sorry if I'm talking geek speak to those that don't get that. But you're still subject to that volatility in significant degree. So I like the app, and Dave, I want you to give a shameless plug. People should download it and use it.
Shameless plug, it's free. We've already got over 10,000 users. We're on our way to 100,000. Join us, people. Tell them to keep their $1 power. I remember being in the room when the issues of how does load participate in the market were discussed, and this notion of customers getting together to install demand-side management, which is what it's called in any other jurisdiction, would be somehow collusive and anti-competitive and horrible and, you know, full of dragon fire and Satan's breath. But the long and the short of it is here, our market, our principal market, our real-time market, is a balancing market. It's where everything happens, and it's where load is going to come to play, whether people like it or not.
That's true. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I paused for effect, and it was too much. It is funny, and you know, you can reflect on how this is working in other jurisdictions. I know that you helped to design the demand management program in California, where you're mixing demand management with an energy market, and that's quite a bit different than the model in any jurisdiction that still has fully integrated utilities. So maybe can you expand on how that works in California, and maybe your views on demand management markets?
Absolutely. The Public Utilities Commission of California issued a ruling that the demand management program that I devised and was functional for 5 years was the most effective they had ever seen, and perhaps the best designed of any in the world. And so I say that not to say yippee for me, but that I do know something about how this works. California does have a day-ahead market. It also, and then after that 5 years, it was ended because the utilities refused to cooperate. The Public Utilities Commission did not make them. Again, this is an issue of political capital, will to implement, and so forth. So the original contract was 5 years. It worked well. The utilities rebelled at the end of that because the crisis mode after 2001 and 5 years ended, and so anyway, you get the picture. It sort of went away because the fire wasn't burning in the front yard anymore. But how it worked was demand aggregators collected mostly retail, large retail, and industrial load that were willing to implement interruption at notice, and they were paid like generators to interrupt their load, because turning off, if I have a washing machine running and we're running out of power and I turn off my washing machine, Dave can run his washing machine, but we both can't run our washing machine. So if I got there first and I'm using it and he wants to, I can say, you know what, I'll be a generator effectively by turning off my washing machine and you pay me some money. And Dave says, okay, I'm willing to do my washing at that price, I'll pay you some money and do it. So that's the concept, only it's done in larger quantities. Alberta is in a unique position to do this because it is hugely industrial with lots of large load that could easily participate in the market. In addition, small load, store chains, agricultural pumping, those are some of the examples we used in California. Agricultural pumping, oil pumping, store chains, those kinds of things, even like Home Depot and grocery stores, actually participated by interrupting load and got paid for it. So designing the market is something beyond the scope of, to describe in the length of this hangout, but creating metering, which Dave can talk about because he's got some really cool new stuff that makes it easier than ever to do, and so that it can be measured, interrupted within just a minute or two's notice, maximum 10, and participate in the market at a particular price point is possible, desirable, and adds to the competitive nature of the market and the ability of load to participate on equal footing with supply.
In Alberta here, it would not take very much, and nowhere near as much as 20% of the market in demand response to really smooth out price volatility and prices, wouldn't it?
You know what? That seems to be the track so far, and based on the behavior of the suppliers. But what will happen if load starts to participate is supplier behavior will adjust to that, as it should, because that's the nature of competitive market. Right now, supplier behavior is always looking for the moment when they can control price. When any supplier, whether it's load acting as supply or a supplier, takes that piece of the equation out of their head, meaning they simply know I can't control price no matter what I do, then they start focusing on economic fundamentals about how to make money in a competitive market. As long as the phrase, where are the telltale signs that I can bid in a certain way to control price are there, the entire math that goes on in a supplier's head is different and broken.
We had an interesting conversation a couple of years ago about the differing nature of a regulated utility system versus the market utility system. And this stays very clear to me that in the regulated utility system, you're worried about things, 50 years from now. In the market utility system, you're worrying about being there that one day when you make all the money.
That's true. And that's one of the inherent struggles with electricity itself, because supply comes in big lumps. You can bring in small gas turbines at 50 megawatts, but much of the supply is at 100, 200, 500 megawatts, large lumps. It tends to be very capital intensive, which makes finance people nervous, and it tends to be long lead time, meaning I have to start it today to come online minimum year and a half, sometimes as much as 5 or 10 years in the future, depending on, if you look at nuclear power or hydro approval facilities, it's way out there. And so the financial projection mechanism and the stability of the growth curve that would underpin the need to add supply is really difficult to do. I have to add here that much of Alberta's coal-fired generation is getting old. It is, some of it is approaching or will be soon its design life. There may be extensions possible, and the other thing is the end of the contracts, which are coming soon, that cause the divestiture will be ending in just a few years as well. Both of those situations will change ownership or control significantly in the province. I think that's, I don't know, Dave, you'll know when those are, 2020 or before then?
2020. Yeah, the last ones are 2020.
Okay, so when that happens, your entire landscape is going to change again. And given the length of time it takes to do things, 2015 is absolutely not too early to begin a concerted, powerful effort to make sure that this stays working, even at the level that it's working, let alone fixing the issues that need to be fixed 5 years ago.
We're both economists, and that's why it's called the dismal science, eh? It's depressing sometimes. We're having the same conversations now that we're on, 10 years ago, 15 years ago in some regards. I really wish that we had a situation such that people were paying a more active interest to ensuring that this was going to be competitive and not just satisfactory. It's, I think, leading us down a path where we'll have significant disruptions as the things that you've mentioned have happened, as our coal fleet gets older and starts to blow up, as they tend to do. I'm not sure that our system can respond to those types of crises without killing the rest of us.
Well, the response will be simply extended high periods of price. There will be perhaps some outages, which again violates the social contract. Just so that it's clear, let me give you an example. If you call your mother on Mother's Day and you get all circuits are busy now, try your call again later, whether it's on the cell network or the landline, that means that we have a capacity shortage in the phone system. So you wait a few minutes and you call, and you might be irritated for a minute, but your call goes through. In electricity, that's a blackout. That means your lights went out, your washing machine went off, and your heater shut off in December. In electricity. So that's what that means in stark terms. The other problem is in the phone system, it's just the last 10 people that get that message. In the power grid, it is not controllable like that. Larger groups of people, blocks of people get out of power, and they are random. They are not necessarily the people that were the last ones trying to use it. So its interruption is a problem. And I'm not suggesting the social contract's not good. What I'm suggesting is that markets don't do social policy. And so expecting the market to behave in a way that adheres to a social policy, like we will never run out and it's available to everybody at a reasonable, whatever that is, price, is not the purview of markets. It is the purview of the social policy makers. And failing to take that into account has bit every jurisdiction that has done this, and they've had all to make accommodations, actions, emergency changes, and so forth in a panic mode as things have gone forward. There is enough collective experience around the world so that we don't have to do that. What we lack here in Alberta is the political will to make the appropriate changes, to get it done so that it will work. If that sounds harsh and someone's going to get mad about it, tough.
I'm not mad about it. I think you're right. I'm hoping more people do get mad about it, though. It would really help.
You know, I understand the political point of view. I mean, elections are when they are, writings do what they do, they respond to the things they respond, and it takes some courage to look out forward and make those actions that you talked about, not maybe 50, but even 5 or 7 years in the future, past the next election cycle. Most politicians do not have that kind of courage, unfortunately, because they're worried about the elections. They need collectively that kind of courage, and they need to listen and look at the things that are working in other markets and listen to the complete design package that I built or that someone else would build that is functional and not partly working. And it's just as simple as that, as irritating as that might be to those who hear this, particularly those that are going to argue from a point of fallacy that what we have is okay.
Yeah, it only happens, I think, that such an important chunk of, you know, public policy, because that's really what it comes down to. I do think that utilities are significantly different from pizza. You know, nobody dies if you have a 4-day pizza shortage, right? But the fact that this stuff doesn't stay in the news is, I think, for 2 reasons. One is it's ego, right? Your eyes glaze over. As I said before, it's a dull as ditch water topic when you get into the nuts and bolts of it. But from a fundamental perspective, what we've got is an essential service for Albertans and Alberta businesses that has them essentially held hostage, right? We are captive consumers in this market. By God, this market's going to have to work, right? It's going to have to deliver reliable results at reasonable costs to be anywhere close to keeping Alberta competitive in terms of its business environment and in terms of its, you know, well-being of its citizens.
Well, the collective policy point, the nexus that you've described, is right there. If you let the electricity market function, no price caps, in the total absence of any controls, it would very likely produce generation and generate electricity. The resulting volatility would probably wreck many other businesses and cause severe economic harm in other areas. So the question is, the public policy nexus is creating that essential service at prices that will allow the economy on which Alberta is so heavily dependent, and that entrepreneurial spirit that is so powerful in Alberta, to blossom and flourish and not be held hostage or destroyed by the, quote, free functioning of a different market segment for an essential service that is like watching paint dry. Ultimately, there are very few people that understand how electricity and the grid actually work. There are very few people that understand the nuances of keeping it working just all the time and always meeting that need so that you never have a blackout and that you never run out. Very few people that understand that. And then simply slapping a market on it and say competitive forces will work is asking for trouble. Now, we did it. We fixed some of the things that I recommended, if you would call me the principal architect. We have left several undone, and we will continue to limp and struggle until we fix the rest of them. And I cannot say, because I can't say when the political will come to fix them, what the potential consequences are to both the individual consumer, mom and pop, and you and me, and Main Street stores, or the large industrial powerful base that is the engine for the prosperity that Alberta enjoys.
Well, what I do know, Kellan, is those people that do know a thing or two about electricity will be at the Alberta Power Summit September 24th and 25th, 2014.
They will be, and unfortunately for them, or fortunately, they get the opportunity to hear you and me talk there, because I've been invited to participate in that, and you are the MC, so that ought to be fun.
It ought to be. I'm going to have to, I don't know, learn to express myself more clearly.
I don't know. I think you do a pretty good job as a consumer advocate. You did a good job while I was there in the government.
Well, we tried our best, Kellan. I'm happy to say we knocked a better part of $500 million off of requested rate increases. I'm sorry to say that that has turned out to be a bit of a drop in the bucket, but what can you do when you're dealing with $5 billion transmission lines?
Well, that's a topic for an entirely different hangout. Talking about transmission congestion pricing and transmission overbuild as an alternative and so forth. And I'm launching into geek speak. So for those of you that don't know anything about that or don't know enough to know what I'm talking about, I apologize. That's another piece for another day.
Well, I do know that the half the assembled host of the University of Calgary is watching today. So hello to my alma mater. I can tell you from experience that you're putting very good products out of your master's program at that university, and Sid says hello. So with that, Kellan, I wanted to thank you very much for coming on and talking about this with me today. Again, Kellan is probably the smartest guy I've run into in the electricity realm in terms of understanding it from 60,000 feet to 6 feet. He came up through the utilities world like I did, and it's always instructive for me to talk to him because he often comes at it from really the highest of principle, which is how do we make this work and function the way that it's supposed to. So, Kellan, do you have anything you'd like to say to wrap up?
Just one thing. You know, whether or not electricity should be restructured or deregulated is a gigantic policy question that I won't even begin to address. Alberta has done that. It has the capability to make this work. So whether the future of the electricity market is bleak or beautiful depends on the political will, the willingness to act in advance of problems, and to do the things that are necessary to make it work. It is not a mystery. It was to start with because we didn't know. But we now know the things that are required to make it work. It can be beautiful if we take that action. So I do not sound a hopeless note. I sound a note of positive encouragement. But in order for it to work, the simple things that make a market work have to be in place.
Well, thank you very much for participating with me. I'm very happy to stay in advance of these things on behalf of our customers. The very exciting new technology coming out for customers to manage their grid exposure, to manage their energy consumption, to allow you to have the choice. You can save money, you can save the planet, you can do a bit of both. It's a brand new world in electricity, and particularly in terms of technology, and we're very happy to be at the forefront of that. Kellan, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very much again. Good to see you, and I look forward to seeing you in Calgary.
Take it easy. We'll see you later.
Okay. And to all those watching, thanks for watching. Tell your friends.